This is Steve at heavenlysign2017.com. On the same day that Jesus was raised from the dead, April 4, 33, the year's 33, I've got some dates here on this date and some other dates I'd like to share with you guys. I found these interesting. Some of them may have some relationship to the whole of the matter. Some may not, but I found them interesting nevertheless. So try to listen closely, and if you get any connections to any of these, just email me back, let me know, give me your thoughts on this. On the same day Jesus was raised, April 4 of 33. On that same day, we're talking about the same day, the Gregorian date, calendar day. In 1973 in New York, the original World Trade Center Twin Towers opened. The Twin Towers opened on the same day on the calendar that Jesus was raised from the dead. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the age of 39. Dr. Denton Cooley implanted the first temporary artificial heart. The U.S. Senate voted 90-6 to enter World War I on the Allied side. And in World War II, U.S. forces liberated a Nazi death camp called Ohrdruf in Germany. 12 nations signed a treaty, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. All of this occurred on the day Jesus was raised. On the same day that Jesus ascended, which would be May 14, the Philadelphia Convention gathered in order to draw up the U.S. Constitution. On that same day, a statue of George Washington was unveiled. And on the same day that Jesus ascended, Skylab 1 launched as the first U.S. manned space station. President Carter inaugurated the Department of Health and Human Services on that day. And Ray Kroc's first McDonald's restaurant on the day that Jesus ascended. You know, these are all interesting dates. You know, it'd be nice if, say, for example, that the rebirth of Israel occurred, you know, on the same date as the Ascension. Oh, wait, it did. 1948, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the independent state of Israel as British rule in Palestine came to an end. Israel is reborn on the same day that Jesus ascended. That's right. It just happens to be 1915 years from Jesus' ascension to Israel's rebirth as a nation to the day. May 14, 33 AD, ascension to May 14, 1948. That's 1915 years. 40 days from Jesus' resurrection on April 4, 33 to his ascension. Go forward 1915 years and it takes you to May 14, 1948 when Israel became a nation again. Now, that Israel's rebirth is the anniversary date of Jesus' ascension is amazing in and of itself. But this discovery adds rebar to our April 2, 2021 midpoint on our timeline, which adds cement to our entire timeline. It confirms Torah calendar as correct. It confirms the 1290 days up front as correct. It confirms the 30-day gap as correct, and it confirms the entire timeline as correct. I logged this fact into our database when it was 88 days away from Tishri 1 when I was given this by one of our top researchers, Brenda Weltner. We all owe her a hearty hug for this little gem because it ranks up there as being one of the most significant discoveries, if not the most significant discovery ever. The gematria value of the name Elohim in the original Hebrew text is 88. Did you hear that, Brenda? So when I heard this, I couldn't help but believe that it must have been very heartfelt on God's part that to know that when his son had to leave his people Israel, their rebirth as a nation would be the anniversary of his ascension. 1915 years. Add the digits. 1 plus 9 plus 1 plus 5 equals 16, and 1 plus 6 equals 7. The ascension was 4433. 4433. 44 plus 33 is 77. If you multiply 44 times 33, you get 1452. 1452. In 1 Corinthians 1:18, the words "which are saved" have a gematria value of 1452. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. The entire verse, Proverbs 9:6, has a gematria value of 1452. Forsake the foolish and live and go in the way of understanding. All these indicators God has given us for years now, while our religious critics continue to offer rebuttals of the Revelation 12 sign, arguing that the sign is not unique or it's only astrology, and that we're all just a bunch of escapees from the state mental hospital adhering to some unsubstantiated apocalyptic belief. You know, it makes me want to walk up to them in my most worst Australian accent and say, "Just what do y'all think it means to be bloody asleep, eh?" The sign made wiki, finally, and has received widespread media attention, including from the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Catholic Astronomer, among others. Honestly, folks, what Christian in their right mind believes that God intended for his church to arrive at this point in history just to project an attitude of, "oh, well, Jesus will get here when he gets here, so I don't want to hear any more about it"? Are you serious? So that's the main crux of this video. I was working on another angle. It actually had to do with the North Star, Polaris, when I was rudely interrupted by our dear sister in Christ, Brenda Weltner, with this bit of shock and awe about Israel's rebirth occurring on the same date as Jesus' ascension. So I wanted to get this out there for you folks to drop your jaws over. My question is, why didn't our religious scholars tell us about this? It's been right there hidden in plain sight on the Hebrew calendar for nearly 2,000 years. And it had nothing whatsoever to do with the Revelation 12 sign or our timeline. But it most definitely has something to do with it now, because it confirms our timeline, folks. It confirms our timeline because the ascension date confirms the actual resurrection date, which confirms the actual crucifixion date, which confirms the midpoint date on our timeline as no coincidence that it was the actual historical date of the crucifixion. It confirms that there are 1,290 days from the church being taken away to when the abomination of desolation occurs. This one diamond of a find by Brenda confirms every other date on the timeline. Now, I checked the calendar. Pentecost was 10 days after the 40 days. Resurrection to Ascension, 40 days. Acts 1:3. 10 days forward to Pentecost. Total of 50 days. I see it on the Hebrew calendar as May 23rd, 33. First day of the week, month 3 on the Hebrew calendar. That's day 23 on our calendar. Same day as the Revelation 12 sign on the Gregorian calendar. So that's the bombshell. Here's some more interesting dates. September 21 on our timeline, the rapture in history, on that same day in history. First gas-powered auto gets a test drive, the horseless carriage. Communist leaders proclaim the People's Republic of China. The Soviet probe Zond 5 returns to Earth. It completed the first unmanned round-trip flight to the moon. NFL's Monday Night Football, guys, it made its debut on ABC TV. That's right, September 21. The game was between the Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets. The Browns won 31-21. Yeah, Jets scored 21 points. Jets. Henry Kissinger was confirmed by the U.S. Senate to become the 56th Secretary of State. And as I mentioned in a previous video, on September 21 of 96, the DOMA Act was introduced. That's the Defense of Marriage Act. It was a United States federal law that, prior to being ruled unconstitutional, it defined marriage for federal purposes as the union of one man and one woman. The Rapture is our marriage act, bringing us, the bride, to the Father's house for the ultimate wedding. God obviously chose this day, September 21, to make a point. This is our ultimate marriage celebration, far exceeding any human way of interpreting what a real marriage should be. Let's look at April 2, midpoint on our timeline. Jesus was crucified. On that same day, the Confederate President Davis flees Richmond, Virginia. The first egg roll was held on the grounds of the White House. President Wilson declares war against Germany to the U.S. Congress. And the National Advisory Council on Aeronautics was renamed NASA. Martin Luther King began the first nonviolent campaign in Birmingham, Alabama. On that date, the New York Times declared the Cold War over. Saddam Hussein threatened to destroy Israel. And Israeli troops surrounded the Church of the Nativity, and more than 200 Palestinians, they had taken refuge at the church when Israel invaded Bethlehem. That's April 2, the midpoint on our timeline. September 13th on our timeline, which would be the return of Christ. George Washington was elected as the first president of the United States. The Soviet Union's Luna 2 became the first space probe to reach the moon. That's right. Russia, first space probe to reach the moon. Same date as the return of Christ. Israel and Palestine signed their first major agreement. Palestine was granted limited self-government in the Gaza Strip and in Jericho. That was 1993. And U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell named Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect in the terror attacks on the U.S. on September 11th, 2001. Let's look at the beginning of the kingdom on our timeline. On that date in history, the Army War College was established. The first lion, don't miss that word lion, to be exhibited in America went on display in Boston. U.S. President George Washington, set aside this day to observe the adoption of the Constitution of the United States. In Egypt, Howard Carter, he first opened the tomb of King Tut. King Tut was a Messiah wannabe. On this day, we saw the first Macy's Thanksgiving parade in New York City. 100 years to the day, to November 26, 27 of 2024. The Nazis forced 500,000 Jews of Warsaw, Poland to live within a walled ghetto. U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed a bill establishing the fourth Thursday in November as Thanksgiving Day. And Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev met with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz at the Kremlin to demand that Iraq withdraw from Kuwait. Jesus returns to establish his kingdom on the very day of the anniversary of which the UN broke ground to establish their world governance. There were a few interesting things that happened on the day of Pentecost. The 30-year war began when 3 opponents of the Reformation were thrown out a window. Ben Franklin wrote in a letter that he had invented bifocals. And get this, on Pentecost, the same day as Pentecost in history, the first nursery school in the U.S. was established in New York City. Nursery school. And Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were ambushed and killed by Texas Rangers on that day. In Germany, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazi Gestapo, he committed suicide while imprisoned by the Allied forces. And Israel announced the capture of Nazi Adolf Eichmann in Argentina. And on that same day as Pentecost, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building here in Oklahoma City was demolished. Well, I hope you have found this video to be enlightening, encouraging, helpful. If it has, if you feel led to click like, share, and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. I love you guys, I truly do. Until next time, this is Steve. Thanks for watching.